Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from John's 4th chapter. We made it all the way up to the 26th verse in the previous lesson. We're going to take up from the 27th verse, which is the exact midway point for a chapter of 54 verses. But before we comment on the range we're going to cover today, we just want to review what we already talked about. So in the chapter, we find the Messiah and his disciples in Samaria, and the reason they were there, they had left Judah to travel to Galilee, which was his native district. Galilee was to the north, Samaria was in the middle, and Judah was to the south. And the reason he left is because the Pharisees were trying to stoke and exploit the divisions between him and his cousin and predecessor and proclaimer John the Baptist. So he could have done one of two things. He could have done what the ordinary Jew would have done, which was go around Samaria, because the last thing they wanted to do was be surrounded by people they outright despised. But the Savior suffered from no prejudicial qualms, and Providence had placed him there in order to minister to a woman of whom we read, a woman of unsavory reputation. And he approaches her at the well of the water at noontime. And the reason she was there, even though the customary times during which one would ordinarily dig water from the well would have been morning and evening, but she was there because obscurity and anonymity would have been advantageous to a woman who was scorned in public. And the Savior, he was fully human, so he required water as needed, and he asks a request for this Samaritan woman to give him to draw some water for him, and she's more perplexed than angered at the request. She's aware of the mutually bitter animosity which existed between the two nations, and he proceeds to deliver a discourse on living water. And because she is worldly minded, she envisions physical replenishment, one that she'll never have to draw water from the well again. Of course, he's speaking of eternal water, spiritually significant water unto everlasting life. But this woman is not completely so carnal or so worldly as to not intuit that he is a prophet when he reveals to her that she had had 5 previous husbands and was currently living in sin or in fornication with her current partner. And then the site of worship, the Savior proceeds to explain to her that the site of worship, which was a source of controversy and contention between the Samaritans and the Jews, the Samaritans were excluded from the temple in Jerusalem as early as the days of Ezra on account of their obstructionism for it. So they constructed their own temple at Mount Gezerim, which was destroyed, I believe, in 128 BM. But he says the location is not as significant as the manner in which one worships, so as to be in spirit and truth. And this woman has at least an inkling of an idea that the Messiah was to come, and he frankly tells her that I am he, I am here, and I am who your people are longing and awaiting for. And the Samaritans, as we read, had a broader, more universal conception of the Savior as the Redeemer of mankind, whereas those of Judea kind of had an exclusive notion whereby his salvation and redemption would be exclusively concentrated on him. So in the 27th verse, we read, "And upon this his disciples came, and they were marveling that he was speaking with a woman. However, no one said, 'What do you seek?' or 'Why do you speak with her?' So his disciples, we read in the 8th verse, they had went to purchase food in the city, and trade was forbidden by rabbinical injunction between Jews and Samaritans, except only in the most dire of emergencies. All intercourse of a friendly or social nature between them and them was strictly forbidden. So the disciples were very much creatures of their time. The Savior was very much ahead of his time. And a rabbi would not be seen speaking in public to a woman, let alone a Samaritan woman. So they're perplexed as to why he is, but they do not say their thoughts out loud. The woman then left her water jug and went away to the city and said to the men, Come, see a man who told me all that I have done. Is this not the Messiah? So what she had done, she was a woman with an unsavory reputation, and because she had passed through, she was on her fifth husband, and the man she was currently with was not even her husband, and he had told her without any prior or advanced knowledge of who she was, so she intuits that he is a prophet, and then she speaks of the Messiah, who the Samaritans would have been also expecting, and then so from there she extends the invitation to come meet this mysterious man of marvel whom she had just met. She spreads the news, and in spite of her unseedy character, her seedy character and reputation, they are amenable to and receptive to her invitation. Then they went out of the city and were coming to him. But in the meantime his disciples were asking him, saying, Rabbi, eat. And he said to them, I have food to eat of which you do not know. So they're aware that he is fully human, and as such he requires food to nourish and sustain him to walk. This was before automobiles, and they weren't on donkeys or horses or anything else. They were walking across a third of a country, so en route they would have required food and water, but he speaks of a higher food of which they do not know. This preempts the bread of life discourse we read of in John's 6th chapter. Then the disciples said to each other, Did anyone bring him to eat? Joshua said to them, My food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to accomplish his work. So the will of the Father, the entire reason for which he was sent, was to reveal the Father to a lost and estranged humanity. Even the chosen people had by this time become somewhat estranged from him. They had a form, but they really were a denial in their worship. But he did not regard the will of the Father, which he came to do and perform and embody and express, as an intolerable burden. Even though it took him to the cross, it was a source of delight to him, and this reminds us of Psalm 48, where David expresses his delight to be an instrument and vessel of the divine will. Do you not say, There are still 4 months, and the harvest comes? See, I say to you, lift up your eyes and see the fields, for they are white for harvest already. So the harvest is as plentiful as the entire earth. Now, in Matthew 10, 5, and 6, we read of him imposing a geographical restriction on their mission and ministry to solely concern themselves with the lost sheep of Israel, at least while he was alive. Then he extends to them the Great Commission, which expands in concentric circles from Jerusalem, Judah, Samaria, and all the way to the ends of the earth. So he's using the harvest, he's using nature to illustrate or lead into or allude to spiritual truth. The harvest is the harvesting of souls. They are to be fishers of men. That's another physically relatable analogy. And even though they were in Samaria at this time, Providence had to put them in there to preempt what would become solidified by the evangelist and deacon Philip in the 8th chapter of Acts, who was the one who most fully evangelized the citizens of Samaria for the new faith. He who is reaping receives a reward and gathers fruit for everlasting life, so that both he who is sowing and he who is reaping rejoice together. So the ministry is a teamwork. One waters, another plants, but Elohim gives the increase. We read Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 3, but we are to combine and contribute our gifts in a combination towards a collective effort. So each of us has at least one spiritual gift, which we are not to use selfishly, not for selfish enjoyment, but corporate employment. And so the ministry, now if we combine our teamwork, then the harvest and the plenitude and abundance thereof becomes our mutual possession when we give our individual and respective gifts in a common cause. For in this word is true, one sows and another reaps. This is a common scriptural analogy, reaping and sowing. These were an agricultural people, and as such they would have been familiar with the process of sowing or planting and reaping or gathering. And the moral parallel, it parallels as a moral principle which has its closest parallel in the Hindu religion, the moral law of cause and effect, which they call karma, the idea being generally that if you treat others well, you can expect to be well treated, and if you treat others with contempt or unfriendly, then you can only expect the same. But in this specific context, he's once more doing the division of labor. So we reap what, strictly speaking, and in the final analysis, we all reap what none of us have sown, because all the preparations that we need, the one who enables us to assist in gathering is already Elohim, who truly does everything we need, and we cannot do it apart from him. So strictly speaking, he's the only one who sows, although we do reap by sharing in his most precious gift, which is the sharing of his eternal essence with immortality of the eternal salvation of humanity. He deigns to share his eternal essence with us unworthy creatures. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. So he's saying, now this is the concept of grace, which is the unmerited favor. Now there's no right or reason that those who have not labored, those who have not sowed, those who have not put in the work to gather or reap what others have sown, but that is the nature of divine grace, whereby we contribute absolutely nothing to our salvation. It is wholly and totally an act, an expression, and manifestation of his grace. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who witnessed. He told me all that I have done. So from this simple testimony came a bountiful harvest. This would have spread throughout the city of Shechem, where they currently were in, which was the site and location of Jacob's well, which I believe in an earlier verse, Jacob gave the land to his son Joseph, who was his most favored and beloved son. But the word of this simple testimony of this woman who simply told what he had done and how he had dramatically impacted and entered into her life, from that small seed of a woman of unsavory reputation spread an abundant harvest. Therefore, when the Samaritans came to him, they were asking him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. So even though he was en route and on the mission to Galilee, there was no emergency for him to be there, save escaping the unnatural contention which was sown between him, his own disciples, and those of John the Baptist by the Pharisees, who by this time would have been attentively watchful to his movements and machinations, and always trying to trip him up or cause him to fail or to do anything they could. And so he accepted their invitation and stayed there for a period of 2 days. And as we read, 2 days in the life of the most remarkable man who ever lived can truly accomplish a lot in such a short duration of time. And many more believed because of his words. And they said to the woman, "We no longer believe because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard, and we know that this is truly the Messiah, the Savior of the world." So her testimony had laid the seed and foundation for their belief, but having been led to them by her, the the evangelist or witness can never ever secure one's salvation. At best, we can lead them to the one who uniquely can, and this the woman very much did, and they elaborate on the fact that from that mustard seed of faith that she had planted in their minds and from their own deliberate investigation as to the one that she proclaimed for them, that they now had cause to believe in themselves. Because they had investigated his claims. And I comment on this phenomenon in the book I wrote, which is called Who is My Neighbor? An extensive commentary on the Good Samaritan parable by Johnston. It is available for purchase at most major online outlets, and I comment on this. So, unlike the unbelieving and critical Pharisees of Judea, who demanded signs, Matthew 12:38-39, Mark 8:11-12, Luke 11:29-30, of confirmation of his divinity as evidence of their faithlessness, the Samaritans sought no signs and witnessed no miracles, save the prophetic revelation of the woman's secret sin. Yet many joyfully believed. The Samaritans, though despised by the rabbis and commoners of Israel alike, or more accurately Judea, as unclean and unworthy, ended up providing a more fertile field for the Messiah's ministry. So throughout the entire range of Gospels, we find him struggling to gain universal reception amongst the chosen people who were selected for this great purpose to bring the salvation of souls to the entire world. And the tragedy is that he struggled amongst Yahweh's own chosen people. They were more earnest and sincere, their minds more open to the reception of the truth. So excited were they that they begged him to stay, a request which he obliged for the length of 2 days. That's something we already read. During the course of that stay, his word yielded much fruit in their lives. It was here that the Savior began breaking down the dividing wall between Jew and Gentile and preempt the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19-29, Mark 15 or 16, actually it's Matthew 28:18-20. That's a typographical error I only recently became aware of. To deliver his message of salvation to the world. Though himself a Jew, he mingled as one with the Samaritans, and against the prejudicial customs of his contemporary Jews, embraced and accepted the hospitality of this despised race, teaching openly in their streets, eating food prepared and served by their hands at their tables. This is something that would have been forbidden, absolutely forbidden by rabbinical injunction, the contemporaneous rabbinical injunction, the idea being that anything that Samaritan hands touch, because they belong to unclean people, that item would have automatically been rendered unclean. So they were allowed to purchase wine inasmuch as it had not they had been pressed by the machinery, but they were not allowed to eat grapes which had been extracted by Samaritans' physical hands. Slept under their roofs and observed a policy of treating them humanely with the utmost courtesy and kindness. So to sleep under their roofs, remember, no intercourse of any friendly or social nature was permitted in the least by the prevailing contemporaneous rabbinical injunctions, but they were overcome by the fact that he was Judean, and because he did not care, he did not deny them his gracious presence or his the expression of his messiahship and divine sonhood. So they reciprocated in kind by accepting him for who he was, and that's just that. It is likely that the seed sown during this brief stay of the Messiah among the despised people of Samaria was that from which the seed was planted for so rich a harvest that would be reaped by the apostles in later years in the fulfilling of their great commission. Then I proceed to outline in the books of Acts the evangelical mission which the which began by Philip, one of the original deacons, and was expanded upon and involved the apostles. Peter and John go down to check on the progress of Philip, but it all began with the Savior himself, so he had very much laid the foundation and had sown what would eventually be reaped to a more bountiful harvest. So once more, we are dependent on the contributions of those who came before us, and we owe everything literally in existence to the Creator of all, and as such we can take no credit for any of our accomplishments. And I'm actually going to cut it off here because of time. In the 43rd through 54th verse, we read of his return to Galilee. I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. And then he heals. He speaks about a prophet not being received in his hometown. In Luke 4, we read that he immediately after emerging victorious over his temptation, he returned to his hometown of Nazareth, which was located in Galilee, and he made seemingly outrageous claims, so much so that the denizens, his native denizens, the people he had grown up with and knew him as a carpenter's son, were wanting to push him off a cliff. And elsewhere in the synoptics, we read that he returned a second time. This was very much an act of grace, and they just failed to take him seriously. They only knew him as the son of Joseph the carpenter. And then he eventually encounters a nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. And this is not to be confused with the Roman centurion in Matthew 8, because this nobleman, who was in all likelihood of Jewish stock, struggles with faith, whereas he says of the centurion that no great faith have I seen in all of Israel, but he does heal his son. And so what began in Cana, the city where he performed his first recorded miracle at the request of his mother, he returns and performs his second recorded miracle at the request of a father, because by the third chapter we read that his reputation for performing miracles, Nicodemus references that as proof that he is in fact sent from Elohim, and the Gospels do not claim to be an exhaustive biography of all that he did and all that he was. Indeed, John closes his own account by stressing the fact that with some hyperbole, that the entire physical parameters of the earth could not contain a book which recorded all of his good deeds. But we do have enough. We have everything we truly need to know that was seen fit to preserve by the apostles as inspired by the Ruach Kadesh. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. See you then. Bye-bye.